From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The New Hampshire primary is in full swing, always an important moment in the presidential campaign season. The date is next Tuesday, and after his victory in Iowa, Donald Trump wants to put the race away by winning in the Granite State as well, while Nikki Haley hopes to rally non-Trump Republicans and independents to make it a real race. Ron DeSantis, meanwhile, seems to be giving up on New Hampshire as he moves his operation to South Carolina, which is a month after the New Hampshire primary, and his super PAC is laying off staff. Never a good sign. Welcome, I'm Paul Gigot, editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal on the Potomac Watch Opinion podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm here with Kate Batchelder and Kim Strassel, two of my colleagues. Welcome to you both. So let's get right into the New Hampshire race. Trump is really going after Nikki Haley now, saying, well, we need to unite. We need to get together as Republicans, unite the country, defeat Joe Biden. Meanwhile, he's calling her Nimrata, which is a insulting take on her name. Of course, she's of Indian Sikh heritage. And let's listen to him go after her on Medicare and Social Security.
She has a hit on Social Security. You know, she wants to raise the age very substantially. You don't need that. We don't want to do that. And we have that liquid gold. We don't have to do that to our seniors. You earned it. You're right. Who said that? That's a good point. You earned it. You did earn it. And you don't need that. And the same thing with Medicare. They want to obliterate it. We're not going to do that. So I say this, get out and vote. And make sure we win by big margins. The bigger the margin, the bigger the mandate that we have.
Is that Bernie Sanders talking about Social Security? Obliterate Medicare. She wants to raise the retirement age. Trump basically taking any reform of entitlements off the table. Haley hasn't, of course, specified how she would reform entitlements, but she has, I think, at least been honest enough to say that they're unsustainable, which is true. And then the liquid gold, I guess he's referring to oil and gas drilling. How that will make the entitlement sustainable is classic Trump non sequitur. But Kim, what do you think about these attacks? I guess he's trying to take her out right away.
Yep, take her out right away. Look, I think this says everything about Trump's concerns about New Hampshire. He's going to hit on her on a number of other things too, but the Social Security one, it's obviously designed to scare traditional Republican voters, but it's also very clearly aimed at unaffiliated independent voters who, as we know in New Hampshire, have the ability to vote in the primary. Notably, the ad that he is running against her, in which he says that you're allowed a secure retirement, Nikki Haley plans to end all that. Those ads are running on MSNBC and other outlets that clearly are forums more that independents might watch or liberals. And the clear intention here is to depress turnout of those people, discourage them from making the effort to come out and vote for her, because this is why she's doing better there than she is in Iowa. It's very different electorate, different type of Republican voter as well, too, but also the ability for those independents to vote as well. So I think this is a very calculated attack designed to hurt her with the base, but also designed to blunt her appeal in what is a state that's gravitated more to her message.
Just to give you an illustration of the different electorate, there are 268,000 Republicans registered to vote as Republicans in New Hampshire, but there are 343,000 independents. So you're talking about a pretty big voting category that Haley can appeal to. Those independents can vote in either primary in New Hampshire, and that will make a difference potentially. Haley looks to be in the polls about, there's one poll that was an outlier. American Research Group had the race tied at 40, but most polls that have come out since Iowa have had her down to Trump by 12, 14 points, so still substantially behind, but much different than in Iowa. And Ron DeSantis is way behind. So Trump is attacking Haley. Let's listen to Nikki Haley's message coming out of Iowa. And there's an ad that is hitting Trump and linking him to Biden.
The two most disliked politicians in America, Trump and Biden, both are consumed by chaos, negativity, and grievances of the past. The better choice for a better America? Nikki Haley.
I have a different style and approach. I'll fix our economy, close our border, and strengthen the cause of freedom. We need a new generation of conservative leadership to get it done. I'm Nikki Haley, and I approve this message.
A different style of leadership, Kate, focusing on style and the new generation line, which is one of her popular ones on the stump. The issues set, nothing truly divergent from Donald Trump there. Pretty classic Republican lines. Is this the message that's going to take her to victory?
Yeah, I mean, style matters. It certainly matters. And I think there is a large appetite in the electorate for less of what Biden and Trump offer. But I do think it's hurting her that she hasn't carved out any real core issue set and that she struggled to define when she says we're going to get it done, what it is. I think even in this moment where voters are not as focused on the issues and on substantive policy matters as maybe they were 20 years ago, I think there still is room for a candidate who can make a compelling case on any number of issues, like school choice, for instance, is a thing that has cross appeal across the entire Republican primary. Also, if she could fill out her tax plan or zero in on some core planks on how she'd make the economy better, that is another area I think that would be ripe for her. But she struggled to do that. And I think that's one reason why she should also come out, if she's going to be attacked on Social Security, maybe come out with a more detailed plan about what she'd do with it, since Trump is saying she'd cut it by 82%, even though she doesn't have a real plan of what she wants to do.
Is that the figure he's touting, 82%? You know, there's always this question in a campaign of how specific to get on issues. I do think, Kim, that Haley would be better off if you're appealing to the voter. You don't have to get into a lot of details, but if you could develop a couple of signature themes or ideas that people will say, oh, yeah, I know. She's the woman who wants to make America great again, to pick one theme that Trump used from 2016, or the compassionate conservatism of George W. Bush from 2000. It helps to have something that's a signature identity, and then you can attach a couple of issues to it that you can take as your own and develop and expand on and make a point. And I say this because let's say that she does go to New Hampshire and do better than the polls. Let's say she gets close in New Hampshire or even surprises, and New Hampshire has been known to surprise, and beats Trump. That's going to be a moment where people are paying attention. They're going to want to look at her and say, okay, what's her message? And if you got that kind of a message, which I think puts something tangible on the point about generational change, it would put her in better stead as she would then go on to South Carolina.
Couldn't agree more. And you don't want to reduce it to the cheap word, a slogan. But you want some sort of campaign theme, as you say, some new unifying principle that when people think of your name, they think of that concept. And then if they are so inclined, they can look into the details further. Look, I think back to Ronald Reagan, Morning in America. Think of what that elicits in someone's head. And Trump, as you note, Make America Great Again. Interestingly, the first candidate who ever used Let's Make America Great Again was Ronald Reagan in 1980. So there's a long and glorious tradition of campaigns using this to identify themselves with voters. And yet she's got so many things she can do that on too. Kate mentioned school choice. We had Glenn Youngkin when he was running again most recently in Virginia talking about the parents' party, the parents' agenda. There's a whole bucket of things there. You heard her talking that out about a freedom movement, tying that more specifically to a freedom economy, for instance, and tapping into people's discomfort over Biden regulations that are increasingly deciding whether or not they can own a gas stove or what kind of car they drive or every little economic decision they make. There are ways to encapsulate this in a way that I think can catch voters' attention. And she's got to do that in a way, too, that takes into consideration what is Donald Trump's appeal among a lot of these MAGA voters? And of course, it's the fact that they feel that he's on their side, that they are a forgotten group of voters. And she's got to figure out what some of those issues are that really matter to them and highlight them in her campaign, doing it in a way, too, that stays true to her principles, not just going pure populism.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Ron DeSantis' campaign and his decision to focus on South Carolina when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here at Potomac Watch with Kate Batchelder Odell and Kim Strassel. And we're talking about the New Hampshire primary, which is the debate in full swing for the primary next Tuesday. People are saying it's the last stand, could be, for Nikki Haley if she doesn't do well in a state that lines up pretty well for her. And certainly she has to do well. And the closer she gets to Donald Trump, the better it will be. Interesting thing I saw, Kate, from Iowa. There was only a single ad attacking Donald Trump run in that campaign I saw, at least in the last 30 days. And that was a Ron DeSantis ad that took a shot at Trump for his spending $8 trillion to add to the deficit and focusing on Trump's issues, not on your issues. There are going to be more of those here in New Hampshire. And I guess the other big question for me is whether or not her operation and the Americans for Prosperity Action group, which is part of the Charles Koch network, can gin up enough to get out the vote of people who wouldn't otherwise vote in Republican primaries or haven't in the past, who could come out for Haley. And I guess one of the other big questions is whether some independents who might vote in the Democratic primary might, because there's not a really big race there, that there is a race. Dean Phillips is challenging Joe Biden's not on the ballot. He's either running a write-in campaign for him. Maybe they'll go Nikki and there'll be a bigger turnout for Haley.
Right. I mean, I think Haley needs to come pretty close to him in New Hampshire to have any shot at contesting him all the way to Super Tuesday. I mean, she's also behind him in her home state of South Carolina, running behind Trump by double digits. But I do think that that's not set in amber. I think that could change if she looks really competitive in New Hampshire and it starts to look like a real contest. And for all the reasons we've discussed about the differences of the primary, it's a much different electorate than Iowa. So I wouldn't draw firm conclusions from what happened in Iowa of how well she might be able to do in New Hampshire. But I do think she will have to continue to build out that issue set we discussed. And I mean, one thing I would add to kind of our last conversation is when we're talking about issues that would be good for her and school choice being one, the economy being another. I mean, I think some of her real appeal has been she's been able to explain to voters why, for instance, Ukraine matters. She sounds most convicted and strongest talking about America's role in the world and why we can't abandon Ukraine. I think she needs to broaden that out into a larger conversation about a strong national defense. Ukraine is polarizing with Republican primary voters, but national defense, peace through strength, is not. And it's actually an area where Trump is weaker than he likes to say. He likes to talk a big game about how we rebuild the military, but it's actually an area of vulnerability. And voters know it because we're watching as Ukraine doesn't have enough ammunition and we're struggling to supply it. So that's just one more area where I think if she can perform in New Hampshire, where she could start to develop out and really put the contest more in play.
Really good point, Kate, because Trump does talk all the time, not only the slogan peace through strength, but he says, I rebuilt the military. It's the greatest military of all time. And we know it's simply false. He didn't. He didn't rebuild it. What he did was he filled some of the holes that had developed in operations and maintenance and some other accounts that Obama had left. And we're glad he did that. But it's a long way from building up the military. And as we found out, our ammunitions lines simply inadequate to meet the current threats. She could make this something of an issue, I think, and in the process show that criticize Trump, show a difference with Trump, show that she's stronger on national defense than Trump on an issue that resonates with Republicans. Kim, let's turn to Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor. Finished second in Iowa, narrowly ahead of Nikki Haley, but is really trailing badly in single digits in New Hampshire. So he's husbanding his resources, sending the staff down to South Carolina, Super PAC laying off some of their employees. The money dwindles. And the thinking of the campaign as laid out seems to be that, well, when Haley doesn't do as well as she hopes in New Hampshire, they'll come down to South Carolina in the end of February. DeSantis will finish ahead of her there, even if Trump wins. And Haley will be knocked out for having lost in her home state. And then it's a two-man race. What do you think of that logic?
Well, I think it's hopeful in the extreme, maybe beat only by the even more hopeful narrative I have been told by some DeSantis supporters, which is that Haley loses so badly in New Hampshire that she is embarrassed out of the primary altogether before she even gets to South Carolina, thereby clearing the field for he and Trump to go head-to-head in that state. I think both of those are highly unlikely unless something phenomenally bad happens to her campaign in the next 4 or 5 days. I think she's on track to do well in New Hampshire, especially if he's not even going to play there. So the headlines are likely to be that she finished second, and then the question being just how far behind she was Trump. But she's not going to get out before her home state. And right there, I would note that at the moment, he's still trailing her. in South Carolina. And she's certainly going to have an advantage in that many voters might gravitate to her because of her history there. Look, I think one thing that might be happening here too is that often if you come out of a state like Iowa, you haven't done well, like was the situation with DeSantis, you want to send a signal to your donors, oh, I'm in it for the long term, so that they don't instantly flee. And that certainly seems to be one of the messages that is coming out of here. I also heard an interesting theory, which is something that I think both DeSantis and Haley campaigns are debating, which is there's an increasing argument from some donors that regardless of whether they finish second or third or the ultimate trajectory of their campaigns, that they ought to stay in all the way to the convention, just in case you get there and Donald Trump's in jail. And then you have some delegates and maybe there's some kind of upheaval at the convention. That's going to be dictated by money and the ability to actually stay in. What matters right now, obviously, far more are South Carolina, New Hampshire, and Super Tuesday. But it's an interesting little thought out there that's now being tossed around among Republican campaigns.
Yeah, I've heard that too from many people saying somebody's got to stay in because we never know what's going to happen in all of these cases. And of course, we don't. We don't know whether the trials will be taking place, how the verdicts will be. And keep in mind, 32% of even those very loyal Republican voters in Iowa said on entrance polls that if Trump is convicted of a crime, that would be disqualifying. So that does pose an interesting issue. On the other hand, DeSantis and Haley, if they stay in, they will get the internal wrath of Trump and can forget about being his vice president if they have ambitions to be that.